Hi everyone, this is the introductory video to our module on therapy or theories of treatment for psychological disorders. Now, your reading for this week is going to be broken up into two categories or chapters. In Western traditions, there are two different ways in which psychological disorders are treated. There are biomedical therapies, and these are categorized by different medications or psychopharmacology, which is what you will read about this week. And then there are other biological treatments, such as psychosurgery, lobotomies, as well as things like electromagnetic stimulation, where you can stimulate the brain with magnets, or deep brain stimulation with electrodes. You will not read about any of those. Your reading for this week will focus primarily on psychopharmacology, which is a primary treatment in the United States. Hopefully that treatment is used in conjunction with talk therapy, at least for the most effective rates and outcomes. But talk therapy can be used alone for treatment of psychological disorders as well. Talk therapy is what we call psychotherapy. This is a traditional kind of beginning with Freud, client and therapist type of therapy. This can be done in groups with families, but this is where a therapist, licensed therapist, uses specific theories to try and treat the problem, the issue, the disorder. Now, keep in mind that talk therapy can be used to treat all psychological disorders, but is most effective for kind of the less severe disorders. It can be used for severe depression and anxiety, personality disorders, but things like some of the psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, it's less effective for, but is often used in conjunction with biological treatments. So what I want to do in this video is talk specifically about psychotherapy and give you a little bit of a preview and foundation to what you'll read later in this week's chapter. So first and foremost, what is psychotherapy or talk therapy? According to Summers and Flanagan, this is in their Abnormal Psych textbook, psychotherapy is a process that involves a trained person who practices the artful application of scientifically derived principles for establishing professional helping relationships with persons who seek assistance to solving or resolving large or small psychological or relational problems. This is accomplished through ethically defined means and involves, in the broadest sense, some form of learning or human development. So let me unpack this long description for a moment. First and foremost, let me say some of the things that we've already talked about in terms of human development, learning, personality theories will all come back in this chapter and the next chapter. So you can look forward to that, and any trained psychotherapist will have education and training in those types of theories and content. I also want to highlight that psychotherapy in this sense involves a trained person who is hopefully trained and licensed, and that they practice their skills that they have learned, but that it's also a bit of an art. Just like we might say someone is practicing medicine, there is an artful way in which people can practice or live out their trained and researched experience as a psychotherapist. Now, this isn't to say that lay counselors, such as religious pastors or ministers or rabbi, friends and family, can't help individuals with their suffering, with their dysfunction. They certainly can. But there's something unique and what many call sacred about a counselor and client or patient relationship, that this individual is trained, that this individual has no personal buy-in in terms of a relationship with this individual, with the client. And so this can allow for a certain space that really promotes healing and growth. I also want to say one last thing, in that there is a strong cultural norm, I think, in Western culture, but many places around the world, that to ask for help is a sign of weakness, that you are seeing a quote unquote shrink, that you are broken. And so really only the most needy, the most broken go see a psychotherapist. And I've heard from a psychotherapist a really great analogy and that I want to share with you. The psychotherapist said that in his perspective, seeking treatment in this regard is like a college education for one's emotional and psychological health. That you don't have to go to college, right? You don't have to go to psychotherapy. But you all are college students, so I ask you to question, why are you in college? Perhaps it's to get a better job, a better career, earn more money, but in essence, you're receiving a liberal or general education because you're learning different perspectives, right? You're growing. And again, you don't have to do that to have a happy and successful life. Psychotherapy offers that same kind of education for you about yourself. Why are you the way you are? Why do you do the things that you do? Why do you do things that maybe you wish you didn't? Why do you have this particular reaction to this type of person? Or why are you always getting in these kinds of relationships? Looking at ways in which you are both thriving, but also ways in which you might change or some additional growth could be promoted. Some suffering and anxieties, and I don't mean clinical anxiety, but anxieties in general can be alleviated. That's, I think, the reason why people do and should seek psychotherapy. So some noteworthy schools of talk therapy or psychotherapy are these four listed on your screen. These will be discussed in greater detail in one of the videos below, as well as in your reading. So these are the main schools of thought. There are many more than these, kind of like you can think about them like religions, and there are many different types of sects or denominations from different religions. So is the case for psychotherapy. So you may be asking yourself, well, then which therapy is better? If I'm going to go to therapy, which type should I get? Well, a very important meta-analysis was done. A meta-analysis is a kind of the research study of all research studies. It looks at all the studies that have been done on a particular topic and analyzes them all to come up with a main or general or overarching conclusion. And a meta-analysis was done on all kinds of studies looking at psychotherapy and client outcomes. And this meta-analysis discovered that the average client who was treated was better off than 80% of the clients who did not receive treatment. Meaning that the people that sought psychotherapy had better outcomes compared to those that didn't, right? So what you can see here on this screen is, on the bottom of your screen, is two curves. You see one in red, which is the average psychotherapy client, the person pursuing treatment, and then the one in blue being the average untreated person. Now, clearly, as you can see here, the lines overlap. Imagine, if you will, that this red line extends and continues through this blue line. So down here, for instance, that means that there are those, if you imagine the red line going to here, there were those that were treated that didn't really get better. They have just as kind of poor outcomes as those that didn't get treated. And there are those, if you follow this blue line up here, there are those that didn't get treated and did get better. They had positive outcomes. But what you want to look at is this space in between, right? That on average, not only is the average for people who got treated better, but more people, more people who got treated got better. So, and this finding was regardless of the therapist or the theoretical approach, meaning this was regardless of which type of psychotherapy was used for people. Now, I'm going to say more about that in a couple of different ways. One important way, or one important thing to think about here, is that most therapists use what we call an eclectic approach, meaning they're trained in all of the main theories of psychotherapy, and they can kind of use all of them and mix and match as they see fit. So the clinical decision-making process rests on these three pillars. In other words, what the psychotherapist does with a client depends on these three things. It depends on the client, as it should, on the client's values, characteristics, cultural, where they reside culturally, whether that be gender, ethnicity or race, religion, sexual orientation, and so on and so forth, as well as their preferences, their desires, their goals, and their circumstances. The clinical decision also depends on the clinical experience of the psychotherapist. Now, this doesn't mean that people that are new therapists are worse than people that have lots of clinical experience. Any licensed therapist has gone through a lot of training that varies depending on the state, right? But goes through a lot of training. And so that person is looking into their training to know what has worked well in these specific circumstances and is calling on their expertise. And then any good clinician is also well trained, not necessarily in how to do research, although sometimes they are, but certainly in how to read, interpret, and understand research so that they know what works best for certain types of disorders or issues based on the evidence, and they're making this decision based on that. And that they put all of these three pillars together in order to come up with their decision and what to do with any particular client that they see. Similarly, regardless of the theoretical approach of the psychotherapist, all of these things are intended to be brought forth in a session with a client. A therapist's goal and purpose is to instill hope. For many people that go see a psychotherapist, they are suffering, they're engaging in behaviors or thoughts or emotions that have become maladaptive, distressing, dysfunctional, and many times they feel hopeless, like this is the way it will always be. There has never been a difference, or there will never be any kind of change. And even among friends and family, there can be a sense of hopelessness. And so a therapist is to bring hope and not only just bring that, but also to instill that. A therapist offers a new perspective. You will read about specific therapeutic techniques that talk only about perspective and changing thoughts, but regardless of the theoretical approach or orientation, a therapist brings this into the therapy session. They also bring a true sense of empathy and authenticity, of really understanding and caring about. Their only goal is the growth and well-being of the person sitting, or the people sitting around them. And so it becomes this, again, sacred relationship. We call this the therapeutic alliance, where there's this trusting and caring relationship that should be between the therapist and the client. And that not only is a therapist offering very clear and positive communication, but that they're encouraging this and teaching skills so that the client can develop this with themselves and with others. So across all therapeutic orientations, these are the things that therapists are trained to deliver and to encourage, to promote, and to teach. Now, the last thing I want to say about the relationship between a therapist and a client in psychotherapy is that although the research shows that the therapist and the theoretical approach didn't matter across all people studied, it does matter for you. There will be certain theoretical approaches that just fit you more so than others. And you will discover that as you watch the videos and read your reading and do the assignment for this week. Some will just resonate with you more than others. Some of you could spend all the livelong day talking about your childhood, and others you're like, we just get to the point? Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Let me fix it. Now, let me say very clearly that therapists do not give advice. If you're wanting to know what school to transfer to, what to do about a relationship, they will not tell you what to do. They will help you decide. But some do that in very different ways than others based on their preferred therapeutic approach and orientation. Furthermore, you shouldn't expect to be best friends with every single person you meet. You shouldn't be best friends with your therapist, but that goes to say that you might not just have an ease in the relationship. You might not really like your therapist. And so if that's the case, move on, get a new one. You're not going to hurt their feelings. They are not your best friend. They're used to this. They will help you find someone else who you connect with better. I will tell you that I have called psychotherapists myself and hung up at their voicemail. And it sounds very superficial, but I've just thought, you know what? No, that's not going to work for me. I've seen people, and several times, several sessions into it, I just thought, you're not laughing at my jokes. Again, that sounds very superficial, but time after time after time, if we're not connecting in that kind of way, then I just don't feel comfortable, and it's not going to be the best opportunity for my own growth. So I say that on one hand, research shows that therapeutic orientation doesn't matter across all individuals studied, but to just clarify and really emphasize that it does matter for you and that it can be a very frustrating process, but not to give up, because a relationship does matter and it will make an impact on your own health and growth and well-being if you seek psychotherapy. So I hope this was a good foundation for you to get started. I look forward to you watching the additional videos on this module and topic, as well as completing the assignment where you'll get to see a therapist and client in real life, demonstrating very clearly and specifically their particular theoretical orientation and approach. So have a great week, everybody. Take care of yourself. Please be advised, again, about any accommodations that you might need for this particular chapter given the topic. Be well and happy learning.